Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian at the Air Force Association headquarters, which houses the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies. And we have with us retired Air Force Lieutenant General Dave Deptula, who is the Dean of the Mitchell Institute. Sir, thanks very much for joining us.
Sure, Vago. Great to be with you.
Today's obviously a very big day. The F-35 Alpha, the Air Force version of the Lightning II, or the Joint Strike Fighter, has been given initial operating capability. Talk to us a little bit about what that means for the program and for the Air Force.
Well, first, Vago, it's a real milestone, if you will, in this program, validating the fact that the Air Force leadership is comfortable with the performance metrics of the F-35 and that it will go on to serve as an extremely valuable capability and provide a much needed modern aircraft for fulfilling the Air Force's mission. I would tell you that it's insightful that, you know, the F-35 had a 6-month window, August to December of this year, in which the Air Combat Command Commander, General Carlisle, could determine whether it met the requirements for initial operation capability, and that he decided to do that at the very beginning of the window. And that speaks to the maturity of the system in getting to this point at the very beginning of the window. So I think it's very significant, not just for the United States Air Force, but all of the other partner nations that are involved with F-35 as well.
One of the other things that the Air Force has demonstrated and was announced today was the air-to-air capability of the aircraft was demonstrated for the first time. Talk to us a little bit about what was accomplished and how important that is to the program.
Well, the aircraft launched a long-range AIM-120 beyond visual range, and then they followed that up with the launch of an AIM-9X that was extremely successful. And so once again, that's a milestone that also demonstrates the wide nature of the capabilities inherent in this aircraft. You've heard me say this before, but fifth-generation aircraft are not just follow-ons to their predecessors, but are modern sensor-shooter aircraft that can not just drop bombs and shoot missiles, but also collect information in which to increase the situational awareness of the rest of the force. And so, again, this is a very significant event because it now means that we have this capability that can amplify and increase the effectiveness of the rest of the force. Today, we have the F-22 doing that in Syria. In the not-too-distant future, we'll have the F-35. That will also assist the Air Force in recapitalizing what, frankly, has become a geriatric force. You know, we're flying bombers that are over 50 years old. We're flying trainers that are over 40 years old. And we're flying fighters and helicopters that are over 30 years old. So getting the F-35 on board in quantity and rapidly is very important to keep the United States Air Force at the top of its game.
From an operational concept standpoint, everybody understands the modernization challenge, obviously, the service faces in terms of maintaining this older equipment. Everybody is working to reduce the cost of the F-35 to get into service in greater abundance. But from an operational, how does the airplane have to change how people think about air power? Because it starts with that fundamentally different thinking. The Air Force has had more experience because it's had stealth aircraft for a lot longer than the other services. What's the kind of thinking change that has to accompany the introduction of the airplane?
Well, the first thing that we need to stop thinking about is measuring value in the context of cost per individual unit aircraft. That is an anachronistic and last century way of thinking, if you will. One has to think about value in the terms of what are the desired effects that these aircraft produce, and what would it cost, if you will, if you didn't have the stealth, modern avionics, and capabilities that go along with fifth-generation aircraft? And the answer is the F-22 and the F-35 are cheap at multiples of their individual unit cost because to be able to accomplish the effects that they alone can do would take multiple number of legacy aircraft to accomplish the same outcomes, if in fact they could do it at all.
let me take you to Libya. Obviously, a new front opened up. There was always a long debate about when people were going to, when allied and nations in the United States would start to engage in action in Libya. What's the importance of the mission, and how is it being executed differently, and will it have an effect ultimately on what everybody's trying to accomplish on the ground?
Well, first, let us go back to first principles. And why did we have to engage in attacks against Islamic State in Libya? Part of the reason is because of a gradualistic, very anemic set of operations that were applied to halt the Islamic State in its homeland of Syria up front. So the strategy has been part of the problem in the context of yielding to the Islamic State 2 years worth of time to influence those to, adhere to their cause. So we have to understand that yielding time to an adversary, and in this case, because we took a perspective with regard to using techniques from the last war, counterinsurgency operations, and applied them to a completely different set of circumstances. The Islamic State have all the characteristics of a state, and they can be decomposed and crushed. But we gave them time. So that's why we see pop-up elements in places like Libya that we're going to have to now take action against. But time factor in war is very, very important, and we shouldn't have ceded that extremely important value to the adversary. Well, what am I talking about specifics? Listen, over the last 2 years, the average number of strike sorties applied in Syria against the Islamic State has amounted to 6. Well, that's not going to cause the Islamic State much worry. That yielded them lots of time. If we had conducted a very decisive, rapid, forceful application against the key centers of gravity that make up the Islamic State in August or September of 2014, then I dare say we wouldn't have had the need to apply force in Libya today. And perhaps there would not have been the terrorist acts that occurred in Orlando, in Brussels, in Paris, and around the world. So it's not just about the individual application of force at a tactical level. We have to make sure that we're applying force in conjunction with a coherent strategy. And quite frankly, that's what's been missing the last 2 years.
But let's go back to Libya. The Libya, what's different about how it's being applied? For example, there are Marine helicopters that are involved in this campaign. What are some of the interesting features about how air power is being used in Libya?
Well, I think that the task force that's involved in applying the force is taking the proper approach in the context of using the most available and appropriate resources to attack the adversary that are available. So that means that this is the whole notion of taking a joint or functional approach to the application of force. It's what's available, what's the right force at the right place at the right time. And in this particular case, Marine Aviate Harriers were the best force available for the use of accomplishing the mission.
When it there are when you look at the Syria campaign, for example, Iraqis and have been showing that they can retake territory. Some of those battles have been very, very bloody. The coalition's explanation is, look, we're trying to move very, very carefully, minimize civilian casualties in how we take back this ground. And I think the Iraqis have also stepped up their game. What's sort of the long-term way to look at air power in a conjoined long-term strategy in the war against terror?
Well, first you have to start with your desired outcomes or effects, which I go back to what I said earlier about the difference in confronting the Islamic State from last war approaches in dealing with a fully fledged counterinsurgency. And so what air power does is provide options that simply aren't available using other means. If air power had been used decisively and rapidly to crush the centers of gravity of the Islamic State, you would have a far different set of circumstances existing today than we currently have. But that didn't happen. In the future, we need to think about using air power to provide options to meet the objectives of what are in the critical interests of the United States of America.
Dave, thanks very much for joining us.
You bet. Thank you.